Hi, I'm James Deaker. Today I'm going to be talking about why publishers swap the ads on their pages. Before I start, if you're enjoying the content, please give me a subscribe on YouTube. Let's get going. So, when we say that publishers swap the ads on their pages, the term that is used in the industry is ad rotation. Ad rotation is generally disliked by advertisers, by agencies, and by users. So why do publishers do it? The answer that you're probably all thinking is so they can make more money. And you'd be right. Thanks. Great video, James. Let's move on to the next thing. But what I want to do today is unpack a little bit more about the publisher revenue stream and why they might choose to do something that very clearly runs the risk of being bad for advertisers and users. So first, a little bit of history. In the early days of the internet, when a page would load, the whole page would load at the same time, and this was called a static page. Over time, publishers realized that they could change a lot of the content on the page, and it would interact as users moved across the page. As they realized they could do this with the content, so they realized that they could do this with the ads on the page. So you may be sitting there reading an article and the content changes and possibly the ad changes too. So here's an example from the CNN website. I didn't plan this when I recorded the video, but it is an interesting example of where they actually swapped out an ad for a product that I was not interested in for a product that I was interested in, the Vice golf balls. But I will also draw your attention to the fact that there is a period of time when the ad is loading and it is distracting. For a second, no ad shows at all, and then the page comes up. So the other thing that I will note is that there are ways to ensure that as the ad is loading, the user is looking at the page, or at least it's in what we call the viewable pane. If it's not viewable, meaning it's below the fold or in some other location on the page that the user literally can't see, this would usually be an unscrupulous or perhaps even fraudulent tactic for the publisher to now employ. So let's consider what happens when the ad first loads. You, as the consumer, will be presented with an ad for a product. Maybe you look at it quickly, possibly you look at it and then go through to the product page. The reality is that if you don't click on that ad in the first few seconds of it loading, then it becomes increasingly unlikely that you would click on that ad. So let's consider a stylized graph. Time is on the x-axis. On the y-axis is the probability of a click. The highest probability of a click is as soon as the ad loads, and the probability decreases quickly over time. I'm going to assert that the ad has essentially the same characteristics for both a direct response advertiser and a so-called brand advertiser. Now, what happens after, let's say, some period of time has passed, 20 or 30 seconds, and the ad is swapped? A few things are likely to happen. One, for that brief second where the new ad appears on the page, the value of the second ad is going to be higher than the value of the first ad for a few reasons. One is that if the person didn't click on the first ad, they probably weren't interested in that product, and so they're getting presented with a new product. The second is that for a brief second, the ad loads and the user is going to be a little bit distracted and may pay attention to the new ad. Because the ad is drawn to the user is drawn to the new content, it is potentially, for that brief second or two, potentially a more valuable ad again. The the amount that line, the blue line in the example I'm showing, is higher than the red line, is a proxy for the value to the publisher of the ad and the value of the ad rotation. So let's think about each of the three groups involved. The website owner or the publisher is one group. The application user is another, the person actually on the web page. And the advertiser is the third group. If we look at the first group, the publisher or the website owner, clearly they're seeing value because they continue to do it. If ads are sold on a click-through rate basis, they are improving the click-through rate on that page in aggregate. If they're sold on a CPM basis, then they will usually also make more money, and with a couple of caveats that we're going to get into when we look at the advertiser and the user examples. So there is a trap that publishers need to be careful of. If they have a number of static impressions, let's say it's 1 million impressions and they're not doing ad rotation, and they look at this opportunity and they say we can rotate the ads and generate, let's say, 20% more impressions, so 200,000 incremental impressions. A couple of things are going to happen. One, those new 200,000 impressions are going to be relatively less valuable than the original million impressions. The other thing that happens that isn't talked about very much is that the original million impressions are also devalued. So even though you may have moved from a world of having 1 million impressions to 1.2, the 200,000 is less valuable and the 1 million is less valuable. So one of the things that needs to be careful of is, again, the publisher is creating 20% more inventory, but in aggregate, they may only see a smaller proportion, 5 or 10%, for example, of incremental revenue as a result of generating this 20% of new impressions. So in summary, generally positive for the publisher. Let's talk about another group. Let's talk about the website user. Most consumers dislike ads. Let's just be honest. They particularly dislike ads that they view as being spammy or distracting. And the act of loading another ad onto the page is generally considered to be distracting. So for the small minority of people that actually do like ads, or in the case that I demonstrated, maybe now getting presented with a product that is more meaningful, you could argue that there is a small amount of incremental value, but for the vast majority of users, we would argue that there is not a lot of value to the users if they're viewing the ads as being spammy. Now let's talk about what it means to advertisers or agencies that are in this case their proxy. This is where things get a little bit problematic. If you look at the advertiser, and this is absolutely critical to this discussion, the advertiser may not know that the ads are being rotated on a page. They may be buying the ads through some kind of programmatic mechanism. They pay to get the ad on the page, and they may not know the publisher's rules. They may not know whether there's no ad rotation, 20-second ad rotation, or 30-second ad rotation. And this is one of the biggest concerns for advertisers about this type of process. Without going to each of the publisher websites, they can't really tell what the ad rotation rules are. So if you consider the first advertiser to load on the page, very clearly their experience is negatively impacted. They used to have an ad that would load and be there indefinitely. Now it loads, but after some period of time, 20 or 30 seconds, it's cut off. So very clearly the first advertiser views this as an inferior experience. Now let's talk about the second advertiser. So they also bought onto the page. They may be answering a auction call saying there is inventory available on this page. They may not know that an ad had already loaded onto that page, that in a sense they are the second ad to load on the page, and that they are much less likely to get a click-through as a result of that behavior. So very clearly for the second advertiser to load onto the page, it's an inferior performance. And again, if you're buying programmatically, unless the publisher is passing you a signal about the order of the ad on the page, advertisers will look at ads that are rotating on pages versus static, and in aggregate just say that it's a slightly worse experience for the advertiser, that in a sense the inventory has become less valuable. So here's an interesting thing to think about though, is if you believe that this is going to be an efficient market, and that over time advertisers and publishers will see that the value of the ad will equalize, then the price or the auction price of that ad will get bid down relative to the static price. And so what we will see over time is a stabilization in the auction dynamics. Usually we will see that the publisher over time will make slightly more money and the advertisers will see more value. But again, one of the things that's interesting to think about is the publishers are creating more inventory, and that inventory is less valuable. And so it's one of the key contributing factors that we see to why we've seen a decline in the value of ads over time. Frankly, there's just more impressions that are being created at lower and lower value. So let's summarize. For publishers, they're going to make more money, and for users, the experience is going to be slightly more negative. But usually the publishers are going to make enough that they are adequately accounted for in terms of all the secondary effects. And so unfortunately, even though they're the only ones who see value in this experience, they're going to keep doing it. Thanks for watching. Until next time.